Alright, we are back with a new video, and today we are continuing with the player ranking series for Total Drama. Today, doing Revenge of the Island. And obviously, this is now part of the shorter seasons with fewer players, and therefore a shorter season to talk about. And admittedly, Revenge of the Island is a season that am kind of mixed on at the end of the day. I know I had it at number 3 of my season ranking way back when I did that. However, it's also a season that I just don't connect as well with as certain other seasons. It's not a season I find particularly memorable at the end of the day, even though I don't have as many technical flaws with it as I would with, say, Total Drama Action. And in turn, I mean, these players are kind of okay. I mean, there are definitely plenty of good players to talk about here, plenty of fun characters as well, but obviously not to the extent as the original cast from the first 3 seasons. So this will still be an interesting video to talk more about these specific players that aren't as memorable, but there are 13 players to talk about on this list. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. So starting off the list at number 13, we have the first boot of the season, and here we have Stacey. And yeah, it should be pretty clear that Stacey is a bad player. I don't have that much to say about her. She really got on a lot of people's nerves with her constantly telling stories about all of her family members and ancestors who did impressive stuff, which honestly, I don't even know if she was telling the truth. For all I know, she was probably just making it up, thinking that this was a way of making herself seem cool. But like I said, she never really had any allies. She got on a lot of people's nerves, wasn't really useful in challenge, and she was the first boot as a result. Not too much to say here, and because of that, she's here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we are jumping quite a bit forward in the placements. I mean, technically speaking, this person was voted out second, but was allowed to come back into the game briefly, only to be taken out. And here we have Dakota. And I actually did consider putting Dakota one spot higher, as it seemed like a main reason she was voted out was one, due to an idle play, but also due to the fact that she got mutated after coming back into the game, which made people like Zoe concerned for her health. So those are definitely factors I thought about. However, at the end of the day, I mean, she didn't play well. I mean, yeah, she did have Sam on her side largely because Sam had a crush on her. But aside from that, I mean, she really did nothing in the game. She was in the bottom 2 at the first elimination ceremony, was voted out immediately afterwards, and then after she comes back into the game, she is immediately taken out again. So, not really an impressive game at the end of the day. And while she did technically come in 7th place, I mean, what did she really do to get that? So because of that, I have her here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we are jumping quite a bit back forward, and we are talking about technically the third boot of the season, but the person who is second from the bottom in placements. And here we have B. Now, again, I did consider putting B a little bit higher, as he was at least useful in challenges early on, and obviously was even useful in the challenge in which they lost, which got him blamed and voted out as a result. However, the main reason I had B this low is because, yes, while he was useful in challenges, I mean, he didn't really have many social connections, largely due to him being very introverted, not really being willing to talk to many people. And yeah, well, he did sort of connect with people like Dawn, and to a degree, Sam, I guess. I mean, he didn't really have that many connections. Scott really got on his case right away, recognized he needed to get him out, which he did. And while B knew that Scott would have been a problem later on, he didn't really do much to stop Scott from taking him out. So I can't have him too high, especially with him as a third boot. But there are at least some impressive elements to his game, which definitely puts him above Dakota and also above Stacey. So because of that, I have him here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and I feel like this person is pretty close to being my personal opinion. I could see an argument for this person being below B. However, they did make it a little bit further, and plus they had a bit more allies on their side. And here we have Sam. And like B, I don't think Sam played that impressively either. I mean, he was on the outs pretty early on. He was losing out on the Dakota vote. I mean, Dakota was someone he wanted to keep, but obviously lost his way there. Wasn't super useful in a lot of challenges. I mean, he was a big reason why they sort of lost the third immunity challenge, although some of that was Scott also throwing it, and he was in the bottom two for that vote, but was spared at the end of the day. But aside from that, I mean, he didn't really have that many connections in the game other than Dakota. And while he was somewhat useful in certain challenges, he didn't really have enough respect or really enough allies at the end of the day to survive a couple of votes. But still, the fact that he did survive a couple of votes is a big reason I have him here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and this person did make it quite a bit further than some people we haven't talked about yet. But again, similar Sand didn't have that many allies, and here we have Anamaria. And the thing about Anamaria is she was on the bottom for a lot of the game, where she was outside the core alliance of Mike, Zoe, and Cameron. And through that, she didn't really have a lot of control in the game. She also was very confrontational. She got into fights with a number of people like Stacey, which is understandable, but she also got into confrontations with Joe, got into confrontations with Zoe. None of that is particularly great, and I don't feel like she was playing that actively well at the end of the day. However, the main reason I have her above someone like Sam is, well, one, the circumstances behind her boot, where she does technically quit the game, but it's more so her just deciding to pull out of the game, where I feel like if she didn't do that, she probably would have lasted a bit longer than like she would have otherwise, on top of the fact that she had already made it farther than Sam, although you can credit some of that to her being on a team that won a bunch of challenges. So there's that. But also the fact that she was at least somewhat connected to Mike, although even then it was largely because she had a crush on Vito, like one of Mike's alternate identities. So, I mean, I guess there's that, which, again, if she were playing more intentionally, that could have driven a wedge between Mike and Zoe, like, and she could have really taken advantage of that. So that's at least one pro for her game. But at the end of the day, again, she wasn't playing that actively. I don't even think that was her intention at the end of the day. She just wanted to get with Mike more so than weaken this alliance that she was at the bottom of. And again, I don't feel like she would have survived if she actually gone to a tribal earlier in the game, where a big reason why her placement is as high as it is because her team won a bunch of challenges. So there's that at least. So again, it's not an impressive game, but I did decide to have her one spot above Sam, and she's here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and these next two, again, were pretty close for me. As one, there is a pretty drastic placement difference between these two, and I feel like these two players have pretty similar merits to a degree, or at least similar issues. However, I feel like this person at number 8 is a person who has more flaws to their game, but also someone that got more lucky than the next person we'll be talking about. And here we have Brick. Now, I did have Brick originally one spot above this person we'll be talking about next, as I feel like he was a more naturally gifted player in terms of his physicality, in terms of him being able to endear himself to a lot of his team members, with him presenting himself as a loyal soldier, which, to be fair, he is. And I feel like those things make me think that in the grand scheme of things, he is more likely to get further on any given season than this person we'll be talking about next. However, there are some pretty big holes in his game. The biggest of which is him being willing to just throw away his game, where obviously at the episode in the 4th episode, which is a non-elimination episode, Brick volunteers to be eliminated after feeling like he was the person that lost the challenge for them. However, instead it was a non-elimination round and Chris simply swapped him to the other team. That's pretty bad in my opinion. The fact that he was just willing to throw away his game, which, say what you will about Brick as a person or a character, I guess. However, again, you probably shouldn't be wanting to be voted out there. And he does it again at the a second swap where he is eventually taken out. However, I feel like a lot of that is due to Joe's alliance with Lightning and also just him costing the team the challenge to begin with. So I feel like at the end of the day, he wasn't someone that wanted to win the game per se. He was more so a team player, someone that cared more about whatever team he was on versus him trying to win the game for himself. That to me is a pretty big knock against this game. And then also there's his, like relationship with Joe, which, isn't ideal. I mean, it does seem to be a bit of a friendly rivalry between them. However, we hear Joe say that she was planning to cut him at some point without him realizing it, which again, another pretty big knock there, but at least it did keep him safe for a lot of the early game. However, there is another big knock in the sense of the Dawn round, where obviously we see Scott planning to steal all this stuff in an attempt to create some drama and frame it on someone. And obviously, we see by the end that Dawn is the one that's framed for it and is sent out as a result. However, what a lot of people seem to forget is that Scott was originally planning to frame Brick for this, and Brick had no idea it was coming. And obviously, if that had been the case, Brick would have been voted out there. And obviously, the main reason Scott switches the plan is because he walks by Dawn in the confessional, prompting him to frame Dawn so that she doesn't try to orchestrate a plan against him, which obviously involves a level of luck there. And the fact that Brick had no idea that this was coming is another massive knock here. So at the end of the day, I feel like Brick on the surface seems like a better player than a lot of the other people we already mentioned, with him being good physically and somewhat good socially, with him like being able to get along with a lot of people. However, it's just his lack of awareness in the game, and plus being saved by several lucky circumstances, that leads me to put him lower and here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7. We have the other person I was alluding to earlier, and we actually have the highest ranked pre-merger left to talk about, and here we have Dawn. Now, I'm sure some people may think that this is too high, as Dawn was technically the 4th boot of the season, was eliminated quite a bit before a lot of people that we already talked about. However, the main reason that I don't knock her more is, well, for a few reasons. One is something I mentioned not too long ago with Brick, in the fact that she gets screwed over in the round that she gets voted out. Scott was originally planning to frame Brick for stealing all the stuff, which again feeds into Scott's plans of creating drama, throwing challenges, weakening his own team. He was originally going to get Brick out that round, and Dawn should have been fine. However, the reason that Scott switches the plan is because he figured out that Dawn was picking up on his game and wanted to make a move against him, which obviously is the correct read for Dawn. However, Scott finds out about this not because someone ends up telling him or because Dawn ends up leaking it out. It's more so because Dawn was revealing it in a confessional, which you'd think would have a level of privacy and confidentiality. However, with it being literally an outhouse in the middle of the woods, that's anyone was just able to walk by. It just so happened that Scott walked past the confessional booth as Dawn was in there sharing all this stuff that she was picking up on, which prompted him to flip the plan. So I feel like she did get very unlucky here, where she thought that she was just speaking to the camera when in fact she was speaking to the person that she was planning on targeting that round, which is not great. At the end of the day, she still gets blamed for it. People still believe Scott over her, which is not great, and obviously she's voted out there. However, technically speaking, she should have been safe that round. Like, Scott should not have figured out that Dawn was plotting against him, or at least not in the way that he found it out. So that's something that I can at least excuse with Dawn. But even before that, like, I feel like she did all right socially, where she was getting along with a lot of her teammates. She was getting along with people like B and Scott, even to a degree. And she was even getting along with people on the other team like Mike and Zoe. And had she gone through that round, had she gone to a swap, or if she had gone to the merge, she definitely would have had more options moving forward. I feel like she had a lot more potential in the game than someone like Brick, who was trying to throw away his game at any opportunity in which he felt like he caused his team the challenge. So I feel like the fact that Dawn was playing the game more for herself than Brick was, plus the fact that I felt like she was doing all right socially while still being more aware strategically and was willing to play more actively in the game than Brick, is a big reason I have her above Brick, but also above a lot of these other players who either like played actively bad or people that just didn't have many social connections at all, which is a big reason I actually have Dawn here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and as you can tell, the rest of this list is all people who made the merge, and it's just a matter of figuring out the order. But at number 6, and this was a bit tough for me, However, I decided to go with Joe. And the thing about Joe is, again, there are a lot of interesting aspects to it where she does only attend one elimination ceremony in the pre-merge, and obviously through that she was safe for a lot of the game. So it's hard to play out just how well she was positioned for a lot of it. Now within the team that she was on, she was never really in the core of her original team, which I feel like was Mike, Zoe, and Cameron. And while she builds a somewhat friendly rivalry with Brick, she states that she plans to cut him at some point, which isn't ideal. Now, she is at the bottom, but it's still not great that she's planning to cut like someone who is also at the bottom and someone that could potentially work with her, so that's not great. She later gets swapped onto the other team where her rivalry with Brick comes to a head. However, Brick isn't targeting her. She also builds a decent relationship with Lightning, thus allowing her to be the swing vote at the first elimination ceremony. And like I said, the only one she attends pre-merge, votes out Brick there, which is a bit of a questionable move if you ask me, but whatever. I think there is some merit to her pre-merge game where, again, she does at least build the alliance with Lightning. And while she isn't at the core of that group for a lot of it, she is able to stay out of danger. Like, and also her physical ability is a big reason why they won as many challenges as they did. And I guess that's a credit you can give her. But then we get to the merge where things start to spiral for Joe very quickly. First, she rejects Cameron's offer to form an alliance with her, which deciding to place all her bets on Lightning, which by itself is pretty terrible as, again, it limits her options moving forward. But then later in that very same episode, she ditches Lightning in the challenge, causing him to feel betrayed by her. And while Scott spares her in voting out Mike there, we literally hear Lightning say afterwards that he should have voted out Joe, which is very, very bad. Obviously, in the next episode, she tries to fix this by going back to Cameron with an alliance, which by itself isn't the worst move, although even then, again, she should have accepted the offer last round, but she handles it very terribly, where she tries bullying Cameron during the challenge, and obviously by the end, with her bullying him, plus the fact that she already didn't accept the alliance the first time, like, Cameron completely turns on her, and obviously she gets voted out. Now, granted, it was a 2-to-1 to 1 to 1 vote. I mean, her burning Lightning and Cameron in quick succession is what ultimately caused her to go out. So I think at the end of the day, Joe's a bit of a mixed bag where, yes, on one hand, like, she is very strong physically, and she did have some glimmers strategically of her building alliances. However, even then, I don't think she manages a lot of her alliances well. I think her voting out Brick right before the merge wasn't the best move in the world. And then obviously her rejecting the alliance with Cameron, followed by mismanaging Cameron when she does try to fix it, is a big reason that I don't feel like she played that great of a game. I feel like if she had gone to more elimination ceremonies in the pre-merge, she definitely could have made herself a target, given how she has a tendency to alienate certain people, particularly people like Cameron who don't fit this jock mold. So at the end of the day, it's not a great game, but there are some merits to it, and she's here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have a bit of a controversial figure to talk about within the fandom at least, and I certainly have my issues with this character in general, but as a player at least, they belong here at number 5, and here we have Mike. And Mike played an interesting game on this season, but like Joe, he only attends one elimination ceremony in the pre-merge, so there isn't a ton of moves to really break down. But unlike Joe, he was in a better position than her for a lot of that pre-merge, connecting with Zoe, Cameron, and Anamaria, I guess. But obviously, the main conflict for him comes with his DID, which he's embarrassed to reveal, fearing that Zoe would reject him. But through him lying about it and claiming he's just a method actor or whatever, Zoe starts getting upset at him anyway. The entire situation with him flirting with Anamaria when he's Vito adds quite a bit of friction to their relationship. There's also the fact that Cameron picks up on his DID anyway, which he gains him trust for sure, but also makes him vulnerable if Cameron spills the beans, which, if you know Cameron, he ends up doing. And when they do go to an elimination ceremony in the pre-merge, his group does stick together to flip on the Scott. However, Scott ultimately saves himself by playing the Chris head, and he gets pretty lucky that Scott doesn't use that opportunity to blindside him. But still, the fact that he was able to have the majority on that vote is something, at least. But then we get to the merge where Cameron does reveal to Scott that Mike has DID, and specifically that he doesn't want to reveal it to Zoe, which Scott then uses to blackmail Mike. Now, obviously, that's a pretty bad position to be in, especially when he doesn't seem to realize that Zoe's already very upset at him for acting very sketchy for pretty much the entire pre-merge. Eventually, he does open up to Zoe and repairs their relationship, but by then, Mike gets screwed over when Scott gets a sole vote to evict, which he does use to vote out Mike. Now, I feel like had it been a normal round where everyone votes, Mike easily survives that, but because he would have Cameron and Zoe on his side, and while Scott probably still targets him and gets Joe on his side, Lightning had turned against Joe by that point, where he literally says at the elimination ceremony that Scott should have voted out Joe. And while Scott could have tried convincing Lightning to stick with him, that would have meant at worst a 3-3 tie, but more than likely it would lead to a 4-2 vote where Joe goes home. So to that end, I think Mike gets pretty unlucky with the format here. At the end of the day, I mean, I can't have him too high in the sense that he does slowly foster distrust among Zoe, which, to be fair, is largely his fault. Even though I can kind of understand where he's coming from, he still manages to sketch out Zoe while still leaking the information out anyway with people like Cameron and Scott later on. So I think those are knocks to his game, but there's still enough merits there with him being in a strong position pre-merge, as well as him getting screwed over by the format. That's enough an excuse to have him this high on the list. However, I feel like the top 4 people do have a bit more merits to their game. So because of that, I have Mike here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and I could see an argument for Mike being above this person, as on one hand, I feel like this person has more flaws within their game than Mike, but I also feel like there's more upside that causes me to have them higher. But at number 4, we do have Scott. And Scott was obviously the most outwardly strategic player on the season, and the main villain, of course. And he does play a good game for the most part, but not without its flaws. Now, early on, he does try to pull an intentional Matt Singh, throwing all the challenges in an effort to lower his threat level, which obviously is a very risky strategy, especially in Total Drama, which has a long history of people being voted out due to challenge performance. But it's also risky because he's banking on being able to work with people on the other team, which isn't a guarantee, especially given the Mike, Zoe, Cameron core that forms there. And considering he tries targeting Brick the moment he gets swapped into his team, I don't think he handles the courting the other original team that well either. But to Scott's credit, he's able to make it work for the most part, avoiding the block and getting up people that pick up on his game. He votes out B, who could have been an issue for him. He also votes out Dawn, someone that was starting to pick up on his game. Now, again, I did point out the issues of that earlier, where, again, he technically shouldn't have found that out through the way that he did, but he did. But honestly, I'll let it slide for him to a degree. I don't want to completely eat his lunch over it. Now, what is less excusable is when Dawn tries to play the fake Chris head that he made to trick her, and obviously it doesn't work. And when she tries to play it in front of everyone, but then literally in the middle of Tribal with everyone present, he admits that he created the fake Chris head, which is very bad because it makes him look even more snaky than he already is, and it's truly mind-boggling that this doesn't backfire on him moving forward. Speaking of which, he does find the real Chris head shortly afterwards, something he's been actively searching for most of the season. He also builds a decent bond with Zoe, which becomes useful for him over the next few rounds. He also agrees to go on the other team as a way of getting even closer with Zoe, which again is another high-risk situation as he is coming onto a team where he's down in the numbers and has a pretty solid core on it that he's not a part of. And I would argue this risk was not as worth it because, yeah, you are building a relationship with Zoe, but considering you already have numbers on your original team, Zoe should be treated more as something to have in your back pocket than as someone to bank your entire game on. But even then, he keeps trying the intentional Matt Singh strategy, even though the entire point of the intentional Matt Singh is to weaken your original team to lower your own threat level and exploit cracks within the opposition. And sure enough, these actions put him at the bottom and cause Zoe to not trust him. And this culminates in him needing to play the Chris head at the last round before the merge, which isn't great. And while Zoe does vote to keep him, a lot of that was due to Dakota being mutated and not wanting that to harm her physically, so even then it's not that impressive. But to his credit, he is able to trick Cameron into revealing Mike's DID and the fact that Mike doesn't want Zoe to know about it, which he does use at the merge to blackmail Mike, knowing that Mike is embarrassed by it. And while he does try to drive a wedge between Mike and Zoe, they are able to work past their differences by the end of the episode. However, things do work out for Scott anyway when he not only wins immunity, but also the sole vote at the elimination ceremony, which he does use to eliminate Mike. Now, while that is the correct strategic decision for him to break up Mike and Zoe, the fact that he needed a twist to get that to happen, that being him having the only vote, is not as impressive. But from that point on, Zoe is committed to getting revenge on him. He gets very lucky at the final 5, where the vote ends up being 2 to 1 to 1 to 1, with Cameron as a swing vote. And he's lucky considering that Cameron doesn't vote with Zoe there. And at the final 4, he's obviously dead to rights unless he wins immunity. He doesn't, and he's voted out. So again, a very turbulent game, and I did consider putting him below Mike considering all the issues that are with his game. He's obviously a very aggressive player and someone that takes a lot of risks. Some of them do work out, however, not all of them do necessarily. The reason I do have him a bit above Mike, however, is because even with him making all these crazy decisions, like throwing all the challenges in the pre-merge, he did solidify bonds with his initial team so that they wouldn't blame him for all those decisions. And I feel like that shines through in a lot of the votes, especially the Dawn round, where obviously he's able to steal everyone's stuff, and then he's able to effectively frame Dawn for it, someone who I think also played a somewhat impressive game, able to get people to believe his side of the story over hers, which I think is very impressive. And plus, again, he is one of the more notably strategic players on the season. And while there are definitely risks with this game, while I don't think he always makes the correct decision, and while I think he does get lucky with certain circumstances, I think there are enough merits there. I think that merge round was particularly impressive, in my opinion, barring the sole vote thing. And I think, again, on an essential team, he does go to all those elimination ceremonies, and he does have to play the game quite a bit. And obviously, he's able to avoid a lot of the heat for a lot of his strategy. So I think at the end of the day, all things considered, I do think his game is slightly more impressive than Mike's, although there are still plenty of issues with it, and he's here at number 4. Now I'm moving on to number 3, and just like my World Tour video, this top 3 is all people who I already talked about in a previous video, whether my winner ranking or the final boot ranking. It's just a matter of the order. But at number 3, we technically have the least flashy player of the 3, even though he was very flashy as a character. And here we have Lightning. And Lightning, again, is a pretty middle of the road game for me, where he doesn't have the glaring flaws that people like Scott or even Mike have. You know, like, although he doesn't play super actively at the end of the day, he is in the majority for the most part. With that said, there are some issues with this game, like obviously the fact that he gets so mad at Cameron at the final 4 after Cameron wins the immunity challenge there. He obviously turns against Cameron despite them previously forming an alliance. And obviously him being so determined to get revenge on them moving forward, which obviously isn't great. Obviously the fact that at the final 3 he does take Cameron to the end is also a bit of a pro first game, but obviously like he does lose to Cameron in most situations if it were a jury vote. So that's not ideal either. And obviously he doesn't have the direct control that a lot of other people had. Even so, he was in the majority for the most part. He does build an alliance with Joe towards the end of the pre-merge, although Joe does turn on him during the merge challenge, and from that point on, he never seems to forgive her. Now, there are still plenty of merits to his game, like the fact that he does able to build the bond with Cameron at Final 5 to get the best of Joe after she turns on him. That's something at least. And even towards the end game, I feel like he does get a bit screwed over with Cameron winning Final 4 immunity, where obviously through that he has to get rid of Scott. Now you could say that he should have voted out Zoe there instead as a way of weakening Cameron. However, again, it was already a pretty bad position to be in. And then obviously at Final 3, like I said, he does make the correct decision in voting out Zoe, someone who would have been a bigger threat. But even then, I feel like, again, he needed a physical challenge in order to win in that situation. So there are like issues with this game in the sense, but most of those issues are in the sense that 1, he's just not super active in the game. And 2, when he is active, you can say that he is guided by emotion at points, particularly with Cameron at the end of the game. However, there are still plenty of merits to his game, like the fact that he was generally in a good position, wasn't in too much danger for the most part. And again, you could say that he would have been better off had Joe not turned on him. He was in a pretty good position after the merge, but obviously After that, he did have to scramble a bit, but even then, he wasn't in too much danger. So because of that, I have him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and this is the definitive top 2. These are two very strong games in my personal opinion. I feel like they're both relatively close. It's just a matter of the order, and I did have a debate between these two to a degree. However, I ultimately decided to have the other winner of the season in Cameron. Now, again, Cameron is a winner. I have him very highly ranked on my winner ranking, and I think there's a ton of merit to his game. However, I feel like there are a bit more flaws with this person's game as the number 1 person for a few reasons. So, one, you obviously have the round right around the merge where he is manipulated by Scott into like revealing his DID, and then through that, Scott is able to do all that manipulation. And obviously, by the end, Mike is voted out, though I already talked about why that isn't as big of a knock as it seems. Still, the fact that he was able to be like cowed into revealing that information is pretty bad. And I also think, he does get lucky at a couple points, namely that final 4 round where he wins immunity. And then from that point on, Lightning has a huge vendetta against him. And the main reason he is taken to the end is because he's seen as easier to beat, which is actually more of a pro now that I think about it. But still, that is something, at least the fact that Lightning was so much against him and really took a lot of joy in wanting to see him like defeated. There's that. And then finally, I feel like while he is in the majority for a lot of the early game, I feel like he was kind of a tag along for a lot of it, where it seemed like Mike and Zoe truly connected at first point of contact. And then obviously Cameron was later added on as one of their friends. So to a degree, he is kind of a third wheel, but it doesn't amount to too much negativity at the end of the day. But he more or less dominated the game for a lot of it. Like, he is a dominant figure in the pre-merge, again, being part of that core alliance. Again, not the third in that alliance, which isn't ideal, but he's still in the core of it. He's never in much danger throughout a lot of the game, and I feel like that's very impressive. Like, he has a lot of the same things I mentioned earlier with him getting screwed over by the Scott's idol play before the merge. Obviously, Scott having the sole vote to evict right before the merge as well. And then obviously, like I said, him accidentally winning the Final 4 immunity challenge. However, there are still some merits there where he also tries to build the alliance with Joe, but is rejected there, even though I don't think that was necessarily in Joe's best interest to reject that alliance. But then later is able to scoop up Lightning, vote out Joe at the Final 5, and really set himself up well moving forward. And then obviously he does get into a pretty strong position at the Final 3 where both him and Lightning and Zoe were planning to take him to the end, and obviously he's able to win at the end. Very strong game, if you ask me. However, there are those few little knocks there, like the fact that he was the third wheel, the fact that, he gets manipulated into revealing the DID. Those are just some little knocks that cause me to drop him below the number 1 person. Although realistically, I could see an argument for Cameron being number 1. He is still a very impressive winner of the show, and as a very impressive player on this season. But I feel like the number 1 person probably has fewer flaws, but also slightly more pros. And that's a big reason I have Cameron here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I think played the best game on ROTI is Zoe. And again, I can see the debate for her being below Cameron. Obviously, the fact that she didn't get to the end while Cameron did, the fact that she wasn't that well positioned compared to Cameron at the very end, and then obviously all the other issues I pointed to earlier. However, I feel like if we're taking away the end game, I feel like Zoe is the better player between her and Cameron. I feel like she had a lot more pros going for her throughout a lot of the game. I feel like she was more connected than Cameron for a lot of the pre-merge, where, again, I feel like she was closer to Mike for a lot of it. I feel like that allowed her to build the core alliance that dominated her teams on the pre-merge. There's also the fact that she builds a good relationship with Scott. Well, more specifically, Scott approached her to build a relationship. And while that ends up crumbling shortly thereafter, a lot of that is through Scott's own doing. But obviously, the fact that Scott felt that Zoe was someone he wanted to work with is at least a pro in her favor. And also the fact that she was having a lot of the same issues as Mike and Cameron in the sense that, yeah, she does lose out on the idol round as well as losing out on the merge round, although those were due to extenuating circumstances. And then obviously we get to her endgame, where admittedly I think Cameron does ultimately outplay her towards the end, where yes, Cameron does build the alliance with Lightning, but even then, like, Lightning does turn on him by the end of it and wants to see him lose. But also the fact that she like starts to dedicate a lot of her attention to voting out Scott, particularly after that merge round. And that's not great either. I mean, the fact that she is so determined to vote out Scott, although I don't think that's as big of a flaw as, say, Cameron getting manipulated by Scott at the merge, because at least with Zoe going after Scott, I mean, yes, she is trying to vote out a big threat. Mind you, a lot of that is emotionally driven, but she's still trying to take out the person who is objectively the biggest threat in the game at that point. So I think that's something. And obviously, the other little knock is the fact that Cameron was better positioned than her, to where, again, Cameron, she needed to win that final immunity. Well, even then, it's not even that she was poorly positioned. She just needed Lightning to not win it. But obviously, with Lightning winning it and him thinking that Zoe would be harder to beat, obviously he votes her out there. However, if either her or Cameron win that final challenge, like, she does get to the end regardless. So again, even then you can say that she gets a bit unlucky with a Lightning winning that final immunity. So there are some, again, minor issues the same way with Cameron, but I do view Zoe and Cameron's ROTI games as very similar. And I could see the debate for Cameron being higher in the sense that Cameron was better positioned at the very end. The fact that Cameron ultimately wins the season while Zoe does not. However, I think Zoe was just better positioned for a lot of the game, and I feel like there are slightly more active pros earlier in the game that allowed Zoe to be in as strong of a position as she was. And that's the big reason that I have Zoe here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And obviously, I will be continuing this series soon, this time covering All Stars and Pocket Tail Island, and then some other videos down the road as well for Total Drama. Stay tuned for those. Other videos for Owl House and MLP coming out soon, and other shows as well. Stay tuned for that. Also, if you enjoyed this content, be sure to check out my other channels, Survivor Gumball. I talk about Survivor and Big Brother and other shows similar to Total Drama, where I talk about people in very similar ways. I talk about very similar ideas and themes. So check that out if you want to. But for now, that is the video. See ya.